is okay. Sue is also a very good friend of mine, as well as being one of our authors. So it's an absolute pleasure to be with her today. I've got lots of questions for Sue, and hopefully, as Anita said, there'll be some questions in the chat at the end, so do feel free to pop them in there. And I know this is kind of a really special thing for Sue to do, because Sue's quote, when I asked her to do this, I've written it down, it said, "I used to dream about Worcester Library one day holding my books. I was a member of the library when it used to be on Foregate Street, and I used to take out loads of psychological thriller books that inspired me to write, and it's so lovely to be happening." So hi Sue again, it's been a while since I've seen you.
Can you hear me? Yeah, I'm not on mute, am I? You can hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
You can't hear me?
You can.
Yes, you can. Yeah, you can. Sorry, I've had a few technical hitches this morning, so I'm like all over the place. Yeah, it's lovely to be there, and it's obviously changed so much over the years. I'm sure some of the people listening, some of our readers will remember the Foregate Street Library, which was lovely and a sort of very big but still quite cozy. And I used to go there. I used to live very close to it, and at the time I didn't have a lot of money, and I'd just moved from London, because I met my husband, and I moved there, and he said, "It's wonderful, Worcester's great," and he worked on the Worcester Evening News at the time, and it was great, and I just fell in love with Worcester, and still love it. I live in Bromsgrove now, so we've moved out a little bit, but we do dream of coming back. And of course now with the library there, that's even so. I mean, it's fantastic. I did a panel there last year, I think, Kim, wasn't it? You had COVID, if you remember.
I did.
We but some of our Bookouture writers, Carla Kovac and a couple of others, all joined, and we did a talk there. I don't know if anybody was there for that, but yeah, it's a fantastic place, and I miss Worcester, and you know, I hope to move back one day and join the library there.
Fabulous. Well, I thought we could start. So I've got lots of questions, but I thought if we could kind of start by me asking you to tell us a little bit about your author journey, and how you ended up at Bookouture, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, if there's any sort of people listening who want to become authors or are trying and writing a book, or you know, it was a hard journey then, and I genuinely think it was harder then. And I don't mean it was hard for me; it won't be for you. But it's always hard to get a book published, and it's always, you know, it's like having a child that you're handing over. It's so precious, and only another author understands how precious that book is. But for me, when I first started, it was sort of about 2005, 2006. I started writing this book. I worked at Pebble Mill, as a television producer, and then I went to Mailbox, and we had a daughter by then, and she was quite poorly at the time, and voluntary redundancy was offered, and so I took it, thinking, well, I know what I'm going to do. I'll leave the BBC. I've been there 15 years, loved it. I'll leave the BBC, and I'll write a book. Of course, that's what I'll do, and then I'll make a million, and it'll all be fine. And I got an agent, and I wrote a book, and the rejections just kept coming in, and it was horrendous. And it was in the days before ebooks, really. So unless you were traditionally published, there was no option, there was no other avenue. And also, you know, you did have to have, you know, it did help. I don't mean this in a bitter way, but it helped to live in London or to know people in the publishing industry, and I didn't, you know. And also my book obviously wasn't quite right for them. So I eventually found a small publisher before Bookouture, and I wrote two chick lit books, and I got those published and thought that was amazing. And then really my journey began when I joined Bookouture. And my first book was quite different from what I write now, and it was called Love Lies and Lemon Cake, which was a comedy, and it was all about baking and love and romance and comedy, and there was lots in it, and that was set in Manchester. And I wrote several books, Christmas rom-coms, and you know, and I loved doing that, but I just felt something was missing. And I was still with Bookouture, and I said, can I have a go at a crime thriller or a psychological thriller? And they have always been so great, Bookouture. They said, yeah, have a go, see how you go. Let's have a look at it. And they accepted it. And I've never written another rom-com since. And I've written, I think it's now 13 psychological thrillers. So that's really how I've come to be where I am now. And my new one came out a couple of weeks ago, which is You, Me, Her, which I'm told will be available in the library soon. It's available on ebook and audio and paperback as well. So
Fabulous,
yeah,
thank
that's my
you.
journey. But it
No,
wasn't an easy one. It was a rocky road, as it is, I think, for most of us writers.
yeah, and I think those of you who were listening to the Angie Marsons interview last year as well will probably remember Angie saying very, very similar things, that, you know, rejections are kind of the given for a lot of
Yeah.
authors. And it's
Yeah.
hard, and that, you know, it's that tenacity and determination to try and do something that you really want to do that kind of keeps you going, isn't it?
It is, and I think what's interesting, I know an author, a fairly well-known author, who actually said to me she was never rejected. She had this fantastic process of being accepted by an agent, the first agent. She got the first book deal. Everything went really, really well, but she always felt she cheated. And I think the problem is if you don't go through all that, when you then do later, as she came to have a slightly difficult time, you're not equipped because you've always been used to just sailing through it. And she said she found then later on when her books didn't sell quite as well for a while. I mean, we all have these bumps in the road, but you have to just keep going, and you kind of dig deep and remember those early days. Well, there was a time when I didn't think I'd ever be published. And so, okay, that last book didn't do as well as I'd hoped, but let's keep going because the next one might. And you've just got to keep on really. And that those early days of hardship do help that, I think. They give you that strength.
So tell us a little bit about your latest book and what kind of inspired that story. And that's it came out, as you said, it came out a couple of weeks ago. You can hold it up to the screen if you want again, because we didn't quite see it for long
Oh,
enough last
sorry.
time.
Is that
Um, can
visible?
you hold it up a little bit, because we can't keep going, keep
Oh,
going. Yeah, that's it, perfect. It might just be me that needed you to do that, but I couldn't see it.
no, that's
But obviously, it's called You, Me, Her, and it's Sue's latest psychological thriller. So, yeah, tell us a little bit about that, Sue, and how how that story was inspired.
yeah, well, the tagline or underneath is one marriage, three people, one murder. And I love the idea of, I write a lot about marriage and marriage and murder, I think is probably mostly my stuff. And with this one, I I don't want to give too much away, but I wanted to do a beautiful, happy life, a family, a lovely couple who've got this, they've come into money and they've got this amazing house. They're building this house in Cornwall, and it's just beautiful. It's going to be a very warm, beautiful summer. And on the first night, they're there together drinking wine and talking about how it's going to be. The little boy tucked up safely in bed. A woman appears on the doorstep, and she knows the wife's husband, and she knows him a little bit too well. And that's all I can say about the opening, really. But there's a lot. As I say, it's set over a hot summer in Cornwall, and it's about do we really know who we're married to? Do we really know who our friends are? And it sort of becomes a sort of menage a trois in a way, in that there's three people in that marriage, but there are other people on the outskirts as well. And it's about how life continues, but at the same time there's all these bumps in the road, and what seems like the perfect marriage, the perfect life, actually underneath there's quite a lot going on, and you can't actually trust anybody in the book.
And it's interesting, really, because your books, I've read a lot of them, not exactly every single one, but nearly every single one, um, and they're kind of people that things. Sorry, I'm not explaining this very well. Your characters are so relatable because they are people that anything could, we could be those characters basically. These things that happen to your characters could be things that happen to any of us at any given time. And I think that's really interesting. And I think that's why a lot of people relate to them.
Yeah, that's really important for me because I think it's very easy. I mean, having been a journalist, and for many years, which is where I started. I think that there's a lot of books, sometimes in fiction, where it can get a little bit far-fetched and a little bit, that wouldn't really happen. So I always try and keep my stories relatable in that that could happen to anybody. And yes, there are people who behave strangely or are a little bit mad or unhappy, or but there's always a reason for that. If they are behaving in a rather strange way, that's because something's happened to them. So I always like to develop the characters too and give them reasons for behaving in a crazy way, or they're not just and I like everything to happen. And at the end, I always like hopefully, an absolute major twist. I like to sort of take the reader through lots of twists and turns, and then at the end, turn it on its head if I can. I can't always do that, but I like to. That's my ideal, setting for a book, really. Yeah,
You like to mess with your reader, don't you? So
I do. I do. I'm quite twisted myself, I think.
Couldn't possibly comment. I've had a lovely message from lovely Sarah Broadhurst, who says, "Hi both, great to see you again, Sue."
Hi,
I think
Sarah.
that's great to see you again to both of us. Sue, I really enjoyed your rom-com books, but think your psychological thrillers are brilliant. Hope we
Oh,
managed to
thank
meet up
you.
again soon, Sarah. Thank you, Sarah. That's
Lovely, lovely to speak to you, Sarah.
very much so. So how do you move from a from an idea, a little spark of an idea that pops into your head, to a fully fledged book? Can you kind of talk us through that process a bit?
Yeah, I mean, what it's amazing what can spark something off, and I can't really tell you what sparks something off in this You Me Her, my latest one, because it kind of would give away a little bit of a twist that happens quite early on in the book, but I don't want to spoil it. Though a lot of reviewers mention it in the reviews, so if you don't want to be spoiled, don't read the reviews. So it's about fears. So in a way, with You Me Her, there is a particular fear that the main protagonist has. So sometimes it can be triggered by something like that. I mean, one of my books, and I always use this as an example of completely random things. I wrote this book. I'm holding this. This is The Sister-in-Law, and I wrote this around the time of all the noise around Meghan Markle and um, Kate Middleton, and it was just this idea of this woman coming into an already established family. And I just love the sort of dynamic and the politics around it and the gossipy bits and the way that families all appear to, again, to be absolutely perfect and everything's great, but underneath, all you need is one catalyst to come in and cause mayhem, which I think I can say has kind of happened in the royal family. So I just thought, the sister-in-law, gosh, this could happen to anybody, somebody coming in. And again, it's not all about how bad the sister-in-law is. There are reasons that she behaves like this. And again, there's a huge twist at the end. But this book is I'd been on holiday. It's a combination of things that happened to you. I'd been on holiday to the Amalfi Coast, never been before, was absolutely in love with the place and blown away by it. And I thought, I've got to set a book here. And I just suddenly, this family was formed in my head, this sort of, you know, family from England, obviously, gone on holiday, and the son decides to invite him. There's two sons, and one of the sons brings his new wife, and it just causes absolute mayhem. And I just like that idea. I like taking, again, as you said, Kim, a relatable situation, a family, a couple. I'm just trying to think, even a holiday, and just throwing a bomb into it, really, with another person or something that's happened. And I think for me, I think that's probably what most psychological thrillers do. I've also got two books that are slightly different. They're not really different, but they're locked room mysteries. And I was very lucky, and I went to Berg Island, where Agatha Christie used to write her novels, which is on a little island just off Devon, the Devon coast. And I went there for research because I thought it was really interesting, and I was able to look around the island and the hotel, and that inspired this book, which is The Resort. And as I say, it's a locked room mystery, and it's set on very much everything is like Berg Island. I mean, obviously, I can't mention it as Berg Island, but that's got sort of 1920s style hotel, and it's very sort of Great Gatsby in its style of very Scott Fitzgerald, and anybody who's a fan of Scott Fitzgerald will recognise there's a couple of little, little bits in there that just will. There's a Daisy and Tom, and people, things that happen are little pickups from his just my little joke really, rather than anything. But again, that's got a huge twist at the end. It's the same formula, it's just set somewhere differently. So settings, if holidays and places, just going to somewhere, just even, in fact, the book I'm writing now is set sort of in Wales, and it's also set in Worcestershire, because I live on the Ochils in Bromsgrove, and so we're kind of I'm looking at a group of people who are neighbours and how close they all are in this housing development. So it's not the Ochils, but it's taken from real life. So I'm just inspired by everything really, and that sets me off, and that can just spark a story. And so the process, I have the idea, I then send a synopsis to my editor, who we talk it through with. She's brilliant, and she will come up with other ideas to add to it. And then I pretty much start writing it. And, it can sound a bit pretentious to say it, but I'm sure as an author yourself, Kim, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Your writers, your characters, then often take over. Once you're in it, you've got the synopsis and you stick as much by it as you can. But why should you if your character suddenly decides, in my case, to kill somebody, or in your case, to fall in love with somebody? It just happens, and you think, oh, okay, and you just go with it. And I tend to go with it. I don't stick rigidly to a synopsis. And then really that just comes to an end, and then the editing process starts, and that goes on for quite some time. So it's quite a lot. I mean, they do say it takes 9 months to write a book, which is a bit like having a baby. And it does feel like by the end of it, doesn't it? I'm sure you'll agree.
Especially when you write it in 6 months, yeah.
Yeah, we do ours quicker, don't we? Really? Yeah. We have very short pregnancies.
Yeah. And I'm hoping that will answer Samantha's question, because Samantha asked, "Do you plan out your plot, or just go with where the characters take you?" So,
bit of both, really. Yeah, bit of both.
And you've talked about. Thank you for your question, by the way, Samantha.
Thanks, Samantha.
You've talked a little bit about location as well. How important is that sort of location to you when you're, is location almost like another character for you?
Definitely. In books, the forever home, the house is the character, and it kind of dictates what happens to everybody, and bad and good. And again, it's got that. I like perfect facades. The perfect holiday, the perfect family, the perfect house. So all those things, absolutely. The lodge is another. I've done 2 sort of locked room mysteries. They're still psychological thrillers, but they're locked room mysteries. And the lodge is one that came out last winter. So it's not perhaps one to read now, but it's certainly a very wintry, stormy, snowy book. And that was inspired by the idea of being somewhere. And Kim and I have actually stayed in lodges for writing retreats, and it's the idea of this isolated place. I mean, it's not where we go isn't isolated, is it? But to go on a retreat and be in a lodge on your own with 2 or 3 people or a family, and then the weather comes in and you're stuck inside. It's those life experiences that then just make you think about, well, what would happen if? And it's that really.
And for those people who don't know what a locked room mystery is, how would you describe that?
Well, Agatha Christie, I think, was probably the queen of them. And it's a bit like Then There Were None. There's 10 people in a house on holiday or in a hotel, and suddenly the weather comes in, and somebody dies, and then somebody else gets killed, and then somebody else gets killed. And in that time, it's like a locked room. It's people within there, and things are happening to them. So the obvious thing is it's one of them. And that's the dark bit. It's somebody in that house is the murderer. And I just love the idea of that. And you can play with that as a writer. You can really play with that a lot, with that formula, if you like, and take it outside the room slightly, or outside the hotel. So in my case, I've got the lodge as the locked room. And people are acting about in the snow, and things happen, but it's those people, those sort of 6 or 8 people that are all there, family, friends, whatever. In the resort, they're all the three different couples who all meet on holiday at the resort, and somebody is the murderer. So that it's like this idea that it's you know whoever it is, you already know the murderer is going to be one of these people, and it's the joy of writing it and the joy of reading it is working out who. And as a writer, you try and move that around so the focus is on different people, and obviously, make it more interesting for the reader.
And do you always know who that person is when you're writing?
No.
No.
And in fact, sometimes in my sort of better books, if you like, the books that have sold really well, like The Sister-in-Law, I have to confess, I'd written it one way, and I spoke to my editor, and she said, "Oh no, what about this?" And it was just brilliant. It was brilliant, and she just came up with this one person that I'd never thought about could do it. That I never thought could have done what was done, and she came up with that. So I can't take credit for that. But all the others, yeah, lots of other books, I do suddenly think. In fact, I think probably You, Me, Her, my new book, that was what I didn't know really who it was until the end, until I got to the end. And it's the way the character kind of speaks to you a bit, and sort of you think, yeah, I know what you've been doing. So it's not always, I think that's the joy of it, really. But having been a journalist and having had to stick with the story for so long, it's really nice to just change everything. And you think, well, wouldn't it be great if that happened? And then you can make it happen. It's great, really. So no, I
I was
don't
going to
always
ask
know.
you. Yeah, I was going to ask you actually, how much do you think your writing has been influenced by you being a journalist in the past?
Yeah, I think it has, because so often I would cover stories. I did a lot of I did a lot of different kinds of journalism, but so often I'd cover stories, and I can't think of anything particular, but I would think, what if that had happened instead? Wouldn't that be better? Wouldn't that be tidier, or wouldn't that be more of a twist? I was watching a documentary recently, and there were all these young people talking about somebody that had died. This is 20, they died 20 years ago, and I thought, what if, and it wasn't, but what if it'd been one of these people who they all lost their friend at university, and it was just a documentary, and I thought, what if one of these people is the one who killed that person? They weren't, but as a journalist, wow, what a story. I mean, terrible, but what a story. So I feel like I would have felt guilty about that then, but now I feel, well, I can. So it does, yeah, it does help. And I mean, obviously, I actually have a family of journalists. My husband's a journalist and my daughter's a journalist, and they're far better than me, and they're far more. They do the sort of legal. They do all sorts of journalism. My husband is a political journalist, but my daughter does everything as well. So if I need to know something about going to court and things like that, that's really useful as well, because I haven't got a lot of that knowledge, but I've got journalists in the family. So journalism is a really good start to writing all round, because you can cover so many different subjects, really, and know what happens in these processes. Because I'm doing a book I'm writing at the moment. Some of it's set in the ICU, and I don't actually know a nurse, but I need to speak to one. But in the meantime, my daughter said, "Oh, I was interviewing somebody in ICU the other day, and she could tell me about it." So it's a great career if you want to move into writing afterwards. It's a nice thing to do. Yeah, and you can stay at
Have
home
people and drink coffee and eat
and
donuts
drink
all
coffee.
day.
Yeah, talk to friends on. Yeah.
And I've completely forgot what we're going to say now.
I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, do you think people are really receptive to helping authors with their research?
Yes, I do. I think it depends on your approach. Helping, you mean? You're sort of giving advice,
Yeah,
you
like
mean?
you said, you needed to speak to a nurse.
Yeah.
Is it easy to find people to get all these answers to the questions that you want?
No, it's not that easy, really. But I think that's partly because I don't want to take up people's valuable time, and I do feel a little bit like, oh, I don't want to. So what I tend to do is, more often than not, I have a couple of friends who are in either the police or in medicine, or and I sort of can talk to them about things. But sometimes it's a specific thing. Um, and like an ICU nurse would be probably the person I'd need to speak to. So I will need to sort of perhaps go to a, go, obviously speak to somebody either that I know who might know somebody, or go through more formal channels and phone the hospital and the press office or something like that. But I just feel like often, the problem with being an author isn't like a journalist. With a journalist, you need to know all the facts, but with an author, if you have all the facts, you can overload yourself and you can make it quite boring. People don't want to know about the processes of the ICU, the intensive care unit. They just want to know what happened in the story. And as long as you get the facts right around them, so it's that really, it's finding that balance, I think, with advice.
Yeah.
And as I say, I'm lucky because I do know a lot of people in different jobs, again, from being a journalist, so I can talk to people. But I think the formal route is usually through a press office or something like that. And they will be helpful. They will help.
I
Yeah.
think it's also oh, it's just pop. Oh, what's the matter with me today? It's always partying I've been doing this week. So something popped in and back out my head again then as well. Oh yeah, sorry. I was going to say sometimes it's about the author knowing the backstory, but the reader not needing to know the backstory, isn't it?
Exactly. That's my yeah, absolutely. You could I would be fascinated to talk to somebody who works in intensive care all day. But then if I make all those notes, then I have to come away from that and I'm like, wow, I now need to, I
Yeah.
mean, I'm sure you find the same with your research. So it is about then you have to sieve it really. So sometimes you don't want an overload because it can take,
Yeah.
and there's lots of interesting stuff that you think, oh, I really want to put that in, but you have to steel yourself and say no, because that's not relevant to this story, but always useful, research. Yeah.
Yeah. Out of interest, I do know a friend who works in an ICU. Just saying.
Oh, perhaps we need to talk.
Maybe you do.
Thanks, Kim.
Where do you keep all the information? So you're writing a book, so you're writing your new book now. Where do you keep all the information about what the character looks like, how they act, sort of all of that along with the plot? Because I know I've been told so that you're not a massive planner.
Oh, really? No, it's true. I mean, I don't know whether you have a process, and I'd be interested to know what you do. But
Of
for
course.
me, a lot of it, as you know me, a lot of it is in my head. But what I tend to do is, if what my problems are, I can imagine the people, I can see what they look like, and that's all fine, and the hair color and things like that. But what I do forget is their age, their surnames, and those kind of things. So those are the things. Plot is pretty, I've got a synopsis, so that's a little bit like my sat nav. I can use that and that gets me there. And if I want to take a different route to the end, I can, as you would with a sat nav. I can take route B, but actually, as far as forgetting stuff, it's figures. I'm not that numerate, so I forget how much money or how many years. And often a copy editor will step in and say, well, if that this and this happened the way you said it, she's actually 7 years old now, and those things, or she's 70 years old. It doesn't always add up. So those are the things I have problems with. So what I've now 25 books in, I've realized I probably do need a slight system. So what I now do is, as I think of a surname or I come up with an age and a slight timeline, I will write that down, which took much to my editor's joy, I'm sure, because I'm sure she's fed up of wading through. So I do try and do a rough timeline now, and I think that's really important. I think, as for any author, I think you can keep the ideas in your head and the plot and the people even, but I think you need to probably the timeline is the thing for me anyway. That's my weakness. What do you find?
Yeah, yeah, I'm absolutely rubbish on timelines, and I find myself when I go through the editing process, instead of going, I don't know, on it was only last Wednesday when this happened, and then I
Yeah.
go through, and then I think, oh, it's too hard to even work out for me, let alone the reader. So I just go, recently this happened,
Yeah, yeah, I've
and I'm
I've
trying
also
to
started to
do
a
that as
couple
I
of
go
days
along.
before and things like that. A
Mm,
couple of days before
yeah,
or last week or yeah, because then you can get, unless it's now, obviously if it's vital to the story, then
yeah,
particularly with psychological thrillers, sometimes
yeah,
timelines are more vital than other times. But yeah, it's really hard. That's the hardest bit. That's one of the hardest bits of writing for me, I find. Yeah.
yeah. I always remember, I think it was Jill Mansell who said that she keeps a diary. So she literally buys a diary and writes in the diary when things happen. So she can kind of go back and go, oh, that happened 2 weeks ago
Oh,
on
that's a good
Tuesday.
idea.
I kind of thought that's a really good idea. But after 9 books, I still haven't bothered to do it. But,
Yeah, yeah. It's putting these systems into action, isn't it? Really, that
Maybe we should try them. They might come up trumps. We might be getting to write 3, 4 books a
Yeah,
year, let alone.
yeah. I mean,
It
it
would be
must be
really fun.
really time consuming when you think about it, but yeah.
Mm. So I think, and I know you and I have had a discussion about this before, readers are getting cleverer and cleverer, and they're trying also. I think they're trying to trip the reader up. Sorry, the author up even.
Yeah.
By knowing what's going on and kind of going, oh, I worked that out ages ago, whereas people tended to used to kind of read a book for entertainment. So how do you find, or how do you sort of combat that and keep coming up with new twists?
It's a difficult one that really because you don't really know until your book is out there. I mean, I do have beta readers. I have two or three lovely beta readers who will read my book while it's being edited. I send it. They're sort of people who have offered to actually. They just messaged me on Facebook and said, "Can I be a beta reader?" And I'm delighted because if somebody's quite, I'm not very good on detail. So I find if I have somebody else other than my editor, who we've read it lots of times by now, if I get fresh eyes on it, then that can really help. What was the question, Kim, again?
Can't remember, to be honest. No, I can really, I can. It was how do you keep, kind of, how do you keep coming up with new twists all the time?
Yeah. Yeah, so that's why I was going down that road because so some of my beta readers who are quite experienced at readers, that's all, they're just great readers at psychological thrillers. They're not, editors, but they will say, I actually knew when I was reading this who had done it. And that then I will because that's why I let them read it during the editing process because then I can change it completely. I mean, it doesn't happen very often. Or um, in the last book, one of my beta readers said, "Oh, when this and this happened, I kind of guessed," and I thought, right, well, I'll change that then. So I just changed it, So that's how. But it is really really hard, and we have a lot of just to explain to everyone, we also, if you're with a publisher, usually your book will go on online to a place called NetGalley, where reviewers will review it, and it's something the reviewers that review your books have done lots and lots of reviews, and they will then, if kindly, hopefully put a good review on Amazon for you afterwards, and on Goodreads, and those reviewers are really, really experienced readers of the genre, and what you want as a writer is for them to say, I really enjoyed this and I really like the writing and the characters. It isn't always about the goal being who did it for me as a reader. But I think more and more these people are so experienced, they're almost like wanting to get to the end and go, right, and I know who did it. And in a way that's not always the crux of it, really. There can be other twists. And it's interesting because often you get on NetGalley that pre-review, people saying, I guessed it. But then on Amazon, readers who just read psychological thrillers for the pleasure of it will say, "Oh, I was really surprised." So it's hard to surprise everyone, I think is what I'm saying. There will always be somebody who knows, oh, I guess that. And as a writer, you feel, oh, I've let them down a bit, really, because I wanted to surprise them. That's part of I feel it's part of my job I want people to go, oh, at the end. That's my, big thing, really. So yeah, it's hard. It's hard to keep that going and to think of different things. And, I like small groups of characters. I don't like too many characters because I think that I don't like to read about too many because I think that can be confusing. So I always have a small cast. And that's hard because then if somebody in that cast is going to be the killer or whatever, then it's really hard to hide them in a small cast. But I won't make the cast big because then it defeats the object. It just becomes confusing, I think. Too many
And how,
people.
no, I'm really glad that you went on to cast then because it just made me think about names as well. And, how do you, after 25 books, kind of keep coming up with different names for your characters? Or do is that something that you consciously try to do?
Oh, yeah. And also, it's really interesting. It's about coming up with different names. And that is hard because obviously we don't realize this. I think we all have favorite names and, influenced by people we've known in the past or whatever. Also, you have to, in my view, I like to keep the names of the era. So, if somebody was born in 1980, then I want them to have that name. You know, it would be odd to call her Brenda or something like that. So, you know, and again, equally, if somebody is much older, then Brenda would be a good name or whatever. So that I find that quite hard actually. And again, a book I'm writing now, I've called the daughter India because I love that name. I always wanted to call my daughter India, but my husband wouldn't agree to it. And my daughter says she's glad I didn't. So I've got two against one there. But I just think it's really exotic and bohemian, and I love it. But the person in the book, halfway through, I realized, because again, I don't always know who my characters are. She wasn't exotic and bohemian at all. So therefore, I've had to change her name to Olivia. You know, it's those, and that isn't even about liking a name or disliking a name. It's just that I chose this name because I thought that's what the character was going to be. I thought she was going to be a certain type of person, and she hasn't turned out to be that. So again, even you, along with names, even your characters don't always start off as you intend them to be. They get shaped by the book, really, and names can come in, and suddenly it feels right. You keep if you keep forgetting the name as you're writing it, that's I feel it's when it's not right. It doesn't suit the character. But if you can come up with a great name that really fits the character, that's it. And I just know when I'm right. Think, yeah, that's who she is. She's an Olivia. That's who she is. You know, it's interesting.
It's funny. Yeah, it is. It's really funny. And I remember with my very first book, I had the main male character was called Dan
Yeah,
originally, and then me and my son always laugh about this because we had somebody come and fit some cavity wall insulation, and his name was Vinny, and he was very handsome and he was very lovely, and I was just like, he is my Dan, and
yeah,
I just
yeah,
immediately changed his name to Vinny, and it felt so much better.
yeah. I think that's a really good point as well. I think sometimes if you can, and sometimes I do it with friends a little bit, and certainly people I know, if you can click onto that and get that character in your head physically and their mannerisms and the type of person they are or that you think they might be,
Mm,
that's really easy to write that character because they write themselves, don't they? You know, obviously Vinny
absolutely.
did because I read that book and he was lovely and you just, you know, he was a real sort of, you know, what do they call book boyfriend? You know, he was perfect really. And you obviously
Mm,
felt that. And I think you have to feel that, don't you, to develop those
yeah.
characters.
Yeah, just I did not
Yeah.
feel Vinny. Can I just say that, please?
Not while he was doing your cavity wall insulation, anyway.
Oh dear, I knew that interviewing you would be a bad idea. Um, what's your favourite part of the whole writing process of writing a book?
Well, so many authors, and I know Angie Marson says this. She loves the first draft because she said it's like being in a sandpit and just being able to do whatever you want and play with all the characters and change things around. I absolutely hate that, and I don't know whether it's because I'm a journalist and I'm used to having the ordeal of the blank page. But I hate the first draft. I just want to get the first draft down, and that's where we've talked about this, the sprinting. So Kim and I both like when we do our first drafts to do a sort of sprinting process, which is, again, if there's any people who are interested in writing books, and it's basically Kim is great. I do it sometimes with you, don't I? And even though we don't live together or near each other, Kim will set her phone and say, right, you've got half an hour. She just texts me and says, right, you've got half an hour, and you have to turn all your internet off, tell everybody to go away, because the internet is just so terrible the way it just comes into your writing day. And in half an hour I can write, just concentrating, just sprinting, not thinking about what you're writing. You've got your story, roughly what your synopsis is, go for it. And that's when the writing is just, I love that bit. I love that bit now. And I've only really been told about this by Kim in the last sort of year or so, really. And I just find that is a great for the first draft, because for me it gets my first draft down and it's done. So you can get a book done well within a month. The first draft, I mean, it needs a lot of editing. So I'd like that process better now, but I still don't like first drafts. So for me, I think I like the later edits when you've got your story, you've got your characters, and in a way, it's almost like you're putting makeup on them and you're just making everything better. You're polishing it and you're adding that little. You're at a comfortable stage where you're not at panic stations where, oh, I don't know where. I'm going with this. You know where the book's going. You've got your story. It's all there, and now you can just, it's like stroking a cat. It's just that this moment of final going through it with a fine tooth comb and adding a little bit here and taking a bit away there. I like the editing process, really. Yeah, interesting. I think I'm quite unusual because I think most people. What about you? Do you like the first
I
draft?
was
Or
just gonna say we should swap. I like doing the first draft, but I don't like doing the edits. Yeah, it
isn't
was
that
a
yeah,
perfect partnership here.
we should write together. Definitely.
Yes.
Because a lot of people do love the first draft, and I can see why, but I just hate the blank page, and I hate the idea that I've got reams to write yet, because I think I'm probably fundamentally quite lazy. And I think once the edit's there, it's all there for me. I'm just playing with it then.
Mm,
And that's why I like it. Yeah. Yeah.
interesting, isn't it? Just going back on a question that's in the conversation, Lita or Lita has said, what about trusting the person who gives you the information? How do you know they're giving you the right answers?
Oh, that's a really good point.
Isn't
I mean,
it?
gosh, you have to, I mean, to a degree, you have to, and it depends who you're talking to. But it's a really interesting question, Lita, because it's all about perspective as well. Even things that are right and wrong, and I'll just tell you a little story. I've got these, you know, lovely friends who are a couple, and they're married to each other, and I'm one day I'm going to write a series about this couple, because one's a lawyer, and the wife's a lawyer, and the husband he was a detective, and they live in our area. And I can remember um, my very first novel. I'm going to wave it around. Um, my very first thriller was Our Little Lies. And I hadn't got a clue. And there is a sort of element of police procedural in there. So I thought, I won't name these people, but I thought, well, I'll ask them what what, if they'd read it through with for me. And my other lovely ladies at the book club read it through for me as well, because I hadn't got a clue. And they both came back to me. And the man who was a detective, one of the things was something like, oh, I don't know. I think it was about how long does it take to get DNA back? And he said, well, it's a bit, and he's a bit sort of, he's quite a completely different character to his wife. And he said, well, if you chat up the guy doing it, and you know him and his friend, and you can, and he came with all these great detective-y things that you could put in a book if you had a detective book and you were doing that kind of dodgy. And she was like, no, she must have given me 10 sheets on DNA and why you don't do that and why that doesn't happen. And you think they're both coming from two different worlds, and it was really interesting, because he sent me a text and said, oh, loved it, Sue, it was great, loved your book. Yeah, the DNA, yeah, it does, yeah, I wouldn't worry too much about that. And she sent me pages and pages on, if you were in this situation, being interviewed by the police, you wouldn't get a cup of tea at that time. They were both brilliant in their own way, because I needed her stuff, because my book was so new, and it was also new to me. And at the same time, I loved his, there was this lovely side of it. So yeah, Lita, you're absolutely right. Sometimes you can't trust one or the other, and they're husband and wife, and they're both in sort of the legal world. So I think that's interesting in itself. And if you can't, I mean, it depends on, I think if I was writing historical fiction, that would worry me more.
Mm.
I think if you don't trust it, or you're a little bit unsure, you can ask somebody else. As a psychological thriller writer, I don't do an awful lot of police procedure. And my research is pretty basic in that, as I say, I've got journalist friends, I've got police friends, lawyer friends. I can get that kind of information. So that's all that matters. What I need now is somebody who would give me a free holiday in the Maldives to research. And then we'd have to see if that was correct or not. I'd have to go there to check, really.
Yeah.
Just go to the
I think I
Maldives and
might have
check.
to come with you. Yeah, I think I probably
I
have to
think
come with you as your
I think you
as
probably
your
would.
publicity director.
I think
Yes,
you so
definitely.
so Lita, I think if that's the answer, really. If it's something fabulous, you need to actually go there and do it yourself. But otherwise,
Mhm.
yeah, it's a hard one, and you can't ever say anybody's absolutely right. Having been a journalist and worked on television programs where I used to have to phone up people for information, you kind of know the areas you're going to, and you hope that, like we said before, an ICU nurse would be able to give you the answers you need. And
Yeah.
and in my case, it would just be, are the CCTV cameras in the room? Because that would be relevant to me. Does this happen? Does that happen? Just those kind of basic things, really.
Mm.
So it
Yeah.
would be, again, her perspective, or his
Mm.
perspective as the ICU nurse.
Fabulous. I've got a couple of questions left. If anybody else does have any questions, pop them in the chat and we will try and get to them. I'm hoping Anita will just let me witter on for a little bit longer. I was going to ask you, Sue, obviously we're talking to people within a library and there's going to be lots of readers here. Which other writers inspire you and why? And who do you love to read?
Well, when I first moved to Worcester, and it was 20 odd years ago now, and it was a new place to me, and Worcester Library was there. I didn't have a lot of money. I was a freelance journalist then. I'd come from London to live with my husband, and he was working, but I was freelance journalist because at the time there wasn't anything I could do, and then eventually I went to Pebble Mill and did television. But before that, I had probably about 2 years where I did freelance journalism. So I wrote stuff for magazines, you know, everywhere really, and every kind of magazine. And in that time, I did have quite a lot of free time. And so what I used to do was go a lot to Worcester Library. And I do genuinely think it was almost like a foundation course in writing for me, because I had that lovely time, which I never got after that. Once you get a full-time job and children and life, you don't always get the time to read as much as you could. But I used to read, a book every couple of days because I was writing articles, but they weren't taking up that much time. Um, and I discovered Joy Fielding, who's a Canadian writer, and she's sort of come back into, they've republished her books. I now can follow her on Instagram, which is lovely because in those days we didn't have obviously we didn't have the internet really then, only just in its infancy. And so it was lovely because I couldn't afford to buy books from Waterstones or Hatchards or Ottakers or whatever they were then. And of course, there wasn't really the works then and places like that. So if you read books, you really did have to go to the library. And Joy Fielding is a psychological thriller writer, and it really is domestic suspense. And she's also written a couple of really deep sort of family books about a wife married to a man with a terminal illness, which was amazing. But I just think she's a brilliant writer. So Joy Fielding is, and probably I assume the library will still have her. And that's where I discovered her. So I feel like somehow that's where Worcester Library has a real place in my heart, because I think that was for me the beginning of thinking, oh gosh, I'd love to write something like this. And I also love Anne Tyler. I I just think she's a brilliant writer, and I don't write like her at all. I couldn't, but she's again about people and characters, and it's all a lot of conversations and interior dialogue, which is really interesting as an author to study people. It's like a psychological study, but they're great stories too. And also I love Louise Candlish, who is a psychological thriller writer again, but I'm sure her books are available in the library. And also Tamar Cohen, who is and again psychological thriller writer that I love, and she's in the libraries too. So it's I think the newer writers that I love are probably like my friends who are digital writers. We don't get a lot of our books in the library. It's certainly outside our area where we live, so which is a shame really. But I think you'd certainly find Joy Fielding and Louise Candlish in Worcester Library. If you haven't discovered them, I would recommend them because they're inspiring really.
And if people have never read a Sue Watson book, which one would you say this is the one you need to read first?
Well, it's interesting because quite a lot of people have read my new one, You, Me, Her, and then they're telling me, and that doesn't always happen. So I think that they would have, that might be a good gateway book. But again, I probably will come back to this one because this seems to be a real favorite and a bestseller, and everyone, it seems to review well. Everybody seems to like it, and it's got everything. It's got a beautiful location. It's got a real sort of twisty family, believable situation. We're all on holiday, it's all great, and suddenly something happens, and that's it. And there's a twist at the end. So it's apparently it's always a surprise. So I think that's probably a good one to start with. And then I think there's about another 10.
Right up to? Can you hold that one right up? Because I can't. No, I don't know why. I can't see the bottom of that. So it's the sister-in-law. It's absolutely brilliant. It's set in Italy. It's fabulous. I still, to this day, love Claire, who's in it.
Yeah, you do. And she was a nurse, wasn't she?
Yeah, and I feel like I know her really well. I still feel like she's somebody from my past that I know. So yeah, so it's really nice to kind of to just hear really about what you think. Anita is saying, do you think Sue would be up for reading a couple of paragraphs from You, Me, Her just before we finish?
Oh, that's very kind. Yes, I would love to. I hadn't thought about this, but okay. So I'll do I can do the prologue, or I can go straight in. Let me just have a little look. If I should have thought of this really.
Well, that's okay. Whilst you decide, Sue, thank you so much for agreeing
Yep.
to do that. Can I just say we try and include a little bit of a reading in all of our events, just because we've been told by people that they love being read to. Apparently, people don't get read to as much as you would think, so it's really great. That'd be amazing.
Lovely.
Thank you.
And there's nothing better than being read to by an author who's written the book, in my opinion.
Okay, so basically, the story is so I'll just give you a little bit so far. So the setting is this beautiful Cornish house. The couple, married couple, are sitting having a glass of wine. The little boy's in bed, and they've actually got this fabulous. I mean, I suppose I build houses in my books that I'd like to live in, and they've got this fabulous sort of patio that overlooks the sea, and it's just amazing. And they're clinking glasses, and she looks up at the sky and she says, this is beautiful. This is our happy ever after. We clink glasses, and as we do, something catches my eye behind him. Look at that. You can see the clouds passing the sun, I say, watching the shadows move through the glass onto the big white expanse of kitchen wall. What? He says. But there aren't any clouds. He turns to look at the wall, alarm in his voice. I look up at the sky, and he's right. It's cloudless. So why are shadows moving across the wall? The hairs on the back of my neck prickle. Tom, is someone in the kitchen? Hello, is anybody there? He says. We're sitting outside, and suddenly a voice comes from inside. It's a woman's voice, and the implied intimacy suggests it's someone we know. Hello? This isn't a voice I recognise. Tom stands up quickly, almost knocking his plate from the table, but he pushes it back and turns away from me towards the kitchen. Hello, the voice repeats, a faint quiver of uncertainty now edging around the softness. Hello, who's there? My husband asks. He looks back at me and shrugs as he walks towards the bifold glass doors that separate the kitchen from the patio. But before he reaches them, the woman emerges. She's smiling, but I feel suddenly uneasy. Has this stranger just let herself into our home? So that's the beginning, sort of the book. Just to give you an idea of the setup there, really.
Given me the shivers.
Oh, good.
And I was looking at Anita's face, and Anita was like, "Oh my God, just see your face."
Just like, I haven't read it. I admit it. I put my hands up, but I will.
Me too.
Thank you, Sue.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I think we've answered all of the questions in the chat. Anita, tell me if I'm wrong.
Yes, absolutely. No, I'll stop the recording now.